In recent times, many of you have definitely come across news in the mainstream media about the second wave of the COVID-19 outbreak. Recently, I came across a similar news. To my surprise, it was deceptive, filled up with misinformation and fear-mongering. So I decided to address this topic and did an extensive study. You are watching Live Scientific. Stay tuned and watch till the end. Please stay tuned to know more. Now let us understand what is a second wave in a pandemic. You can think of it like waves on the sea. The number of infections goes up and then comes back down again. Each cycle is one wave of the coronavirus infections. In an interview with the BBC, Dr. Mike Tildesley, an epidemiologist at the University of Warwick, said it's not particularly scientific. How you define a wave is arbitrary. It is rightly said humans learn from the past experiences. In the year 1918, the infamous influenza virus outbreak, popularly known as the Spanish flu, occurred. Initially, it wasn't strong and deadly, but in the fall of 1918, that is around September, the second wave struck the US and eventually spread in the whole world. It took the lives of about 50 million or 5 crore people. This shattering past experience of mankind is the reason that we are so concerned about the second wave of this COVID pandemic. The first case of COVID-19 was reported on 21st February. Israeli government succeeded in containing the disease and lower its spread, thus flattening the curve. Once things were back to normal, a complete reopening of the country was announced in the beginning of May. But this time, situations worsened and government was unable to implement policies and measures against the pandemic. The virus roared back at the end of May, resulting in a steep increase in the number of cases. Finally, the health minister announced that Israel was hit by a second wave of the pandemic. Spain saw one of the most stringent lockdowns in the COVID-19 era, but 2 months after it was lifted, now the virus is spreading faster than any of its neighboring countries, thus becoming Europe's fastest rising caseload within 2 weeks. When the state of emergency ended on 21st June, Spain was registering 100 to 150 cases per day. Now the number is above 3,000. Germany, in spite of the continued measures against the pandemic, experienced a surge in COVID cases recently. This further spiked the local lockdowns in some provinces, though scientists argue whether or not it can be termed as a second wave of infection. Despite sharing a border with mainland China, where the first cases were reported, Hong Kong kept its infection numbers down and was able to avoid extreme lockdown measures as introduced in China and India. But now it's been hit not even by a second but a third wave of infections. What went wrong? Let's hear it from Ursina Ma, the president of Hong Kong Public Doctors Association.
In fact, the government had taken a very loose, or maybe I would like to say a careless approach. They opened up our border, let people like sailor, cabin crew, or officials or merchants from mainland go get into Hong Kong without any testing, without any quarantine period, and then they brought the index cases of our third wave to Hong Kong.
Health officials in South Korea believe the country is going through a second wave of coronavirus, despite recording relatively low numbers. South Korea, a country held up as a model for its response to the COVID-19, is on the brink of the new nationwide outbreak. Social distancing rules have been stepped up. Masks are now mandatory in Seoul. The government has also considered whether to close schools and businesses. The country became hyper-vigilant when the first case of unknown pneumonia was reported in Wuhan. It has a proficient and self-established health system that warns about the upcoming pandemic or epidemic. The country's proactive democratic government is combating the pandemic with science and technology. Despite being in a close proximity with China, this country has effectively contained the spread of COVID-19 and served as a great model for the whole world. Now let's understand why is a second wave occurring. Lockdowns which has already caused massive disruptions are lifted slowly. People start to move freely and thus becoming more susceptible to the infection. After the first wave, once infection rates comes down, people of countries which were hard hit by the pandemic may have misbelief that the pandemic is over for them, which is not. In June, the European Union opened up its internal borders to set up the economy back on track and promoted tourism all over Europe. It also had plans to open up international borders, which is currently under review due to the rising number of cases. Often governments lay down standard operating procedures which are not applicable to a greater part of population in the country. In Germany, scientists of the Stamheim sewage treatment plant have found a unique measure to trace the second wave of the pandemic. Yes, the sewage treatment plant itself. Viral particles which are inactive or dead are present in the feces of the infected patients. Let's see how it works.
Ist da Corona drin?
Da ist Corona drin. Insbesondere hier
Yes, the coronavirus is in there, especially this sample. It comes directly from the sewers. We assume the largest amount of the virus is in there, and in the course of the purifying process, the water gets cleaner and cleaner. You can see that here. Then there are the next steps. It gets a lot clearer. And this is the last step. That means the water leaves here pure.
Some of the samples are analysed at the in-house laboratory during regular routine checks. Some are stored in this refrigerator. The containers are sent to the Helmholtz Center for Environmental Research in Leipzig. 19 other German sewage treatment plants send samples there too for analysis and comparison.
Based on the concentration of viruses in wastewater, it's possible to conclude how high the level of infection is in Cologne, for example. When things go back to normal, levels drop. If we examine it on a daily basis or several times a week, we can see if levels rise again. We can see if we have to take extra precautions or if we can reduce some measures.
In this way, if the scientists' calculations are accurate, they can develop models to compare the measurements of different regions, even if the water is diluted by rain. In the end, we get a system which predicts the second wave of the coronavirus outbreak.